Thank you for listening in to Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. Please remember to subscribe, hit the like button and share. Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. I'm your host, Alison J. Today we have with us our guest, Christine Cesa. Christine, a survivor advocate of commercial sexual exploitation of children, works in the emergency department. Christine is an important part of the trauma team responding to patients and providing emergency services. Christine has been a critical part of equipping and educating medical staff through this work. Many survivors of human trafficking have been identified and provided assistance they needed to begin the recovery process. Graduating with a Masters of Intercultural Studies with children at risk from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. Additionally, she completed the Vineyard Leadership Institute and holds Bachelors in Education from Ashland University in Ohio. She is also trained in Ending the Game curriculum. Christine is passionate about prevention, advocacy, and awareness of the commercial sexual exploitation of children. She believes that no matter what has been done to a person or what they have experienced, everyone can receive the healing and restoration they need. As a survivor of the commercial sexual exploitation of children, Christine was commercially sexually exploited by a family member. Familial trafficking is among the most common forms of exploitation in the United States. As a child, Christine lived at home, went to school, and lived as a child who was commercially sexually exploited. Christine says there was no normal childhood experience. She was not seen or heard in her community. No one was ever there to protect her or saw what was going on. She believes that if we educate the community and know how to respond, we are better able to protect the most vulnerable among us. Christine, welcome and thank you so much for joining us here on Conversations with Alison J. I'd really like to get started with the work that you do in the community and in the emergency department. So please just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It came out of this. So within the human trafficking movement, there is this kind of a very informed to have survivor leaders and survivor experts at the forefront and in leadership positions, because we know that survivor voices and survivor leaders need to be in leadership positions because people like myself who have degrees and who have lived experiences and who have job experience are the experts. And so a few years ago, one of the healthcare systems, it's now called Common Spirit Health, Dignity Health, realized that we believed that having a survivor advocate as part of the trauma team, the survivor leaders realized that if they had that, that would have been the most helpful experience for them when they would have been in the healthcare system. And we know that there are studies out there, and we know that upwards of 80% of survivors report that they've gone through a healthcare system, emergency department, clinic, physician, something while they're being trafficked and they were not identified. So we wanted to change that. We wanted to and so they brought on what ended up being me. It wasn't originally me, to be that as a pilot program. And the other thing that was happening at the time, like in the last number of years, was a way that people were being identified in both in sex and labor trafficking was by law enforcement. And so you have a power dynamic going on with the trafficker already, making you afraid of law enforcement. Right. And you already have mostly men. Oftentimes there is a female trafficker as well, but being that controlling dynamic to then a law enforcement officer in a heavy law male field, sometimes women as well. There are female officers as well. And they're trying to do right. But oftentimes what would happen, especially in the past, was the perpetrator or whatever would get away with the crime, and the victim would get arrested. And so in the healthcare realm, what we're doing is the person is there, and we're meeting their healthcare need, and we're trying to identify these indicators of trafficking, both sex and labor, and trying to meet the root needs, the true healthcare need, which is that trafficking, because they will continue to come back and continue to come back. And oftentimes the people who are being victimized don't even know that there's an option out. They don't realize. And when we provide trauma-informed care, informed care to all the staff, from, when I say all the staff, I literally mean everyone, from security to people, to our environmental services staff, to our nurses, to our doctors, to social workers, to everyone that would touch that patient, to treat them with dignity and care and support, it completely changes. And then when someone like myself can step in and say, hey, I see these things going on, we just want to make sure you're safe, educate them on human trafficking, and let them know, like, I've been through this as well. Yeah. You can see that person's guard go down, and some of the times they're not willing to accept the help yet. They're not quite ready. Maybe they're worried about their child that's still out there. Maybe they're worried about their, maybe something they left, who knows, but some of the time, at least, they are willing to take the help, and they will we try to go into a shelter with us and help. I'll look for a shelter in the community, and they will accept that help, and we'll keep them for the hospital for, a number of hours, or even overnight, or whatever it takes, until we can get them into a safe place, if they so choose, if they want it, because the emergency department's not jail, and our hospitals are not jail. And so, but this really empowers that patient. And then even if they leave, we let them know the hospital is a safe place. The emergency department's a safe place. If you choose to, at any point, you can come back here and we will help you. No judgment. And so that has really kind of shifted the table for them. And so where they don't have to be criminalized, right? It's part of the whole person healthcare picture for these patients to be able to, and it's really switched the picture on our staff as well, to be able to see that, because a lot of times people didn't really believe that human trafficking was going on in our communities, and it was going on in the United States, and what human trafficking even looks like but when staff sees it firsthand, and they see that patient that was their patient or was somebody in the department, and they realize, no, this person really was trafficked, and it wasn't, I'll tell you, the majority of the patients I see, I would say, without looking at my numbers, I would say that at like 98%, 95 to 98% are US citizen, female, sex trafficking. And I'm not saying that's statistically the percentile of trafficking, but that's who we're interacting with. And if you look at data from Polaris, if you look at data from other organizations, the data of survivors will be different. You'll see more breakdown to labor trafficking. You'll see more breakdown to other genders and nationalities and all of that. But for what we're seeing in an emergency department, and that shows you the violence against women as well. So.
And it's something that you said really struck me, that you said that it was approximately 80% have already been through some kind, or have actually touched hands with somebody in the medical profession, and it went unnoticed.
Yeah, it's a bit higher than that, but yeah, and that's one study. There's another study done where it's a little bit lower than that, but yes. So, if somebody comes in, and sometimes the medical ailment is not as severe, but if somebody comes in and says they have a stomach ache, or they have a twisted ankle, and they do a social service, assessment, and said, are you safe in your home? Do you have, Are you drinking? Are you, people, especially people who've been through the foster care system, know how to answer questions.
Right.
If you've been abusing your home, you've been through the foster care system, any of these things, you know how to answer the questions so that you get a positive outcome and nobody's paying. No, so like if you've had a really violent incident just happen, and you can't say, yeah, I'm safe, right? If you've just been stabbed, if you've been run over, if you've, if you have a gunshot wound, if you, been beat up really bad to where your face is swollen, you can't say I'm safe at that point. Like you can't, but if you have a swollen ankle, even if our clinical staff sometimes know patients are lying, like they will know, like one of the indicators is your clinical presentation doesn't match up with what you're saying. And so people have come in and had basically a deep laceration, is a deep cut, and they'll say, I got that, like, walking around my house, or I slipped in the kitchen or something. And most of our clinical staff will say there's no way what they're reporting is how they got that cut. There's just no act. It's the same thing with abused kids. They'll say, oh, I slipped in the bathroom. And we know that, like, either that spiral fracture or that cut or that bruise, like there's no way what they're saying happened actually happens. The same thing with domestic violence until while they're still protecting that abuser, or while that abuser's threat is to traffic, or that perpetrator's threat is too severe, they're not able to ask for help. And so one of the things we've done is, with survivors' input, because we want to be survivor informed, is create new posters that are very simple. You can read them in very short, like 30 seconds or less, and just say, if you're experiencing these type of things, talk to your nurse. Ask for help, right? Like if someone's holding your ID, if you're not getting paid for work, if you're feeling, these simple things, right? Talk to your nurse. Some clinics, they have things posted in the restrooms. Those kind of things are very helpful for folks, because they did come to the hospital and they're alone and they feel scared. They don't know the nurse will help them sometimes. Right. They know the nurse will help them, like, because they've broken their, their facial bones are broken for the third time this month, but they don't know the nurse can help them get to a safe place, because that's not generally what nurses do. But a lot of staff have been trained to know we have a policy, and the policy can be followed, and they can reach out to someone like myself when they have these type of patients. So it's not every day, but when it does happen, it does take a little while, and we have policies in place to keep them safe.
Okay. That makes sense, because when I heard that, in my mind, I'm thinking, how is that possible that they could, like, that number would be so high that they wouldn't be helped? But you explaining it that way actually really does make a lot of sense, because if somebody's coming with a twisted ankle, for example, I've busted up my ankle a couple of times. One of them is literally because I was wearing shoes I should not have been wearing. So obviously, of course, that's no indicator. And another one, because I was an athlete, I busted it out playing track. So a busted ankle is something that could be explained away so easily, to your point. So that makes so much more sense now that you've said it, depending on the type of injury or the type of thing they're going into the hospital for, makes it easier for them to not cover it up.
Right. And it's multiple indicators together. So it's maybe they're accompanied by a controlling person, or maybe they have no ID, or they have multiple IDs. Maybe they have no phone or multiple phones. Maybe it's the way they're dressed. Like currently in the area I'm in, it's quite warm. And so if I was dressed either very provocatively, that might be, if it's a Friday night and I was out, at a club, that could explain it. But if it's Monday morning, like it is currently, and I come
Wednesday afternoon,
right, like in a random time and I come in dress that is not situationally appropriate, or if it's, you're in New York City and it's February and you come in a bra and a short skirt, that's telling. It doesn't mean you're being trafficked, but it's multiple indicators, right? And, or, if you're a foreign national and you're nervous that, you don't want to give out where you live, and that's a normal thing. Saying your date of birth, saying your name, saying your address to registration, that's normal. And if you're nervous to say that, then, that it's at this, in our current state of state of our country, it's understandable that a foreign national will be nervous. We provide care to everyone regardless of their status, but it's normal.
Or even to your point, if they don't give out like their name, date of birth, or address. Or what just came to me is sometimes, even if, to me, depending on the age of the individual, if they don't even know the address.
Right. And sometimes people don't know what city they're in because they move so frequently, or they're always looking to the person they came to, if they're allowed to give the answer, that kind of thing. So it's brandings as well, like particular tattoos on a person. Lots of people have a tattoo. So just having a tattoo isn't an indicator, but particular tattoos are indicators, particular occupations or like histories are indicators. So it's a lot of these things together. Like if they're working and they're not getting paid, if they're working and they're not allowed to leave, those type of things are indicators. So with a lot of things put together, but, our staff are kind of trained at this point to like look for those things. And if the nurse is suspicious, they can get a social worker to do more in-depth history. So those kind of things are all indicators, but a healthcare space is a really good space to do it, because we're just trying to like make sure when you get discharged you're safe. A lot of our patients report homelessness. It doesn't mean, now we have a large homeless problem, and just in the United States, period. But a lot of times when someone reports they're homeless, if they may not appear homeless, or they, if you're living with your trafficker, or you're living in like hourly motels, you may not want to say that's where you're living. So that's not an indicator necessarily of trafficking, but it, like I said, all these things together, they kind of equal like something questionable maybe going on.
Right, got you.
So, all of those things. And then again, human trafficking just in general, it is like the elements of force, fraud, and coercion, right? And so it's sex and labor, force, fraud, and coercion. It doesn't have to include movement. Like it can include movement, it doesn't have to include movement. So, and it can be men and women, it can be people who are transgendered, it can be LGBT community, all of those things. So the healthcare community, we've realized in the last few years that I would definitely say in the last few years that this is a space where being knowledgeable about human trafficking is to our patients' benefit. And we have identified quite a few people, and having an advocate there who specializes in human trafficking, and specifically a survivor of human trafficking, assists everyone. Because it does take a long time when you have a survivor there and someone you're helping. It takes a long time. And in the meantime, we have other patients who need assistance. Like the social workers are quite busy. And so, but we all work together. And the other thing with the hospital is you all work together as a team for the patient, because sometimes you have to involve administrators, the emergency department director, the person above them, and the person above them. And when you're on working in the team element, it helps like everyone to work together. So, and we all want what's best for that patient.
Right. Yeah. And just you said that it's very heartwarming to hear and to know that you said that when people go in, they're not aware that the nurses can help you, because typically in your mind, you go into the hospital, into the emergency room to get fixed for what you went in there for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really is encouraging to know for anybody that is in the unfortunate position of being trafficked, that if you present with bruises on your arm or so on and so forth, and you are afraid, yes, that nurse can help you. Even that, because I would never have thought of that the nurses there can help if you can say something. So, and it's a little bit what comes to mind, like I don't remember the name of it, but if somebody has a baby and rather than abandon the baby, they can, the safe place is the police station, the fire department,
Mm-hmm.
So this is pretty much the same thing, isn't it? That even though you wouldn't think about it, because trafficking is not a medical problem per se, it is somewhere you can go for help, and the nurses are educated where.
Well, trafficking does have extremely serious medical like what do I want to use? Medical roots, like medical consequences is what I want to say.
Okay.
Medical consequences to the effect of there's no studies on this that I know of, although there might be studies on this, to where there's serious health consequences when a person has been trafficked. Mm-hmm. We see extreme health consequences on a person to where survivors have long-term health consequences, as far as some survivors have serious not neurological but serious health consequences as far as trauma affects our bodies long term.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And then even a number of victims / survivors of mm-hmm. trafficking end up dying out there. Yeah. And so we don't fully know the numbers, because a lot of times if they're Jane Doe, the law enforcement may never know, right? When they find them, they may never know. So it truly is, because we don't catch them that time that they come in all beat up, or that time they come in with that spiral fracture, that time they come in. Each time when I see somebody really severe, each time they come in, I think next time it may be worse.
Yeah.
Next time, yeah. Right. And we want to catch them at a time where we don't have to see somebody very, very critical. Mm-hmm. And so really it does really go together. But and a lot of people do have long-term consequences, because trafficking has extreme violence in it. Because if somebody, especially sex traffic, well, I shouldn't compare them like that, but I will say within sex trafficking, there is a huge amount of violence that will occur. Mm-hmm. If somebody is paying for sex, they think they can do whatever they want. And mm-hmm. there is a large amount of violence that takes place by the trafficker, and especially by the buyer of sex. And so oftentimes that's how a person ends up in an emergency department. Mm-hmm. It is things like that. And so in Greater Los Angeles, I would say that I've seen a number of paramedics and law enforcement get better at identifying mm-hmm. and when they bring them in right away to say this is a victim of trafficking, because they recognize like certain things when they're picking them up. If it gets to that point where it would be considered a medical trauma. Mm-hmm. We don't want it to get to that point, but it does sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't think anybody would even think to put the two together, to even begin to say that there is the medical side of it that could mm-hmm. affect. And of course, as you mentioned, it's just like, of course, yes. Because it's and because it's something that you said earlier that I think a lot of people would actually find very alarming, because you don't think of the medical connotations, the medical consequences or implications of trafficking, because the truth of the matter is a lot of people, their introduction to it, for want of a better word, is the movie Taken. You think it's so sanitized, and I know to use the word sanitized is a bit of a oxymoron, really, but it's so sanitized in how it's done. But in so many cases, that's not the way, because she left America, went to, I think, Paris, or went to France or somewhere, this guy at the airport, charming, and all the rest of it. However, something that you mentioned earlier about the statistics right here in the US. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are thinking that it doesn't happen here in the US. But am I not mistaken in saying that the statistics of it happening right here in the US are staggering?
Yeah. So I definitely focus on the US in all of my trainings and all of that. Statistics change very fast, and depending on study that's done and all of that. And there's a lot of reputable agencies that are out there. Taken, I could talk for a long time about Taken, but I would say to anyone out there that do not base your information on trafficking on the movie Taken. And
I mean, don't get me wrong.
No, that is a lot of people. Every time I do a training, I ask who's seen Taken. And so for a lot of people, that is their like model of trafficking, and they're looking for a guy in a white van to snatch up the girl and like think that all of it is some girl dragged from under a bed, right? But for most people, so back to your question, yes, human trafficking in the US is the second largest criminal industry. So it's not.
I'm sorry, you said the second.
Yeah. So, and it's the majority of cases, I would say, and it's not like my opinion, I'm going off of stats here, it is US citizens. So and we do have labor trafficking, and it's not that people are smuggled over the border in big vans. It's that people come here for labor trafficking. People come here on legal visas, on legal passports, and they're promised a job often, or they're promised, other things. And then sometimes their passports are held from them, or they're trying to fulfill a contract, or trying to send money back to their families, which is something that often happens. They're come here through some type of legal means. So that the difference between coming here through a coyote over the border, right? That's one thing, right? But that is not trafficking.
That is not that's not all of trafficking.
Well, oftentimes that is that it could be a small percentage of what's happening, but that is not the mass percentage of what's happening. And that would mostly be labor trafficking. The majority of sex trafficking is US citizens who have the majority of sex trafficking, survivors knew their trafficker. Less than 3% of trafficking survivors were kidnapped.
That's very important to know. And I'm sorry, Christine, I'm going to ask you to please repeat that. That is very, very important to know, because again, I've seen movies. There was one that popped up on my Netflix yesterday. It was one of those Nollywood Nigerian movies, and it was about that. And again, it showed that it was strangers doing it. I think there was another one. I haven't watched it. It was with, oh God, what's her name? Paula Payton or Patton. I think it's called Trafficked. And all of the movies I've ever seen have always been a stranger kidnapping the victims. So that's very important that people hear that and people know that. So I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat that.
Particularly in the US, it might be happening more in other countries. And I know even in other countries, arrangements are made and people think they're going to do a job in another village, or like work taking care of children or things like that. But kidnapping most likely does happen more in the developing world. But but here in the US, about 3% or less of, and it does happen sometimes, so people should be aware they shouldn't just like let their kids go off with strangers. You know, it's, and kidnapping period does still happen, but kidnapping for the means of trafficking happens about 3% of that time. And if a new study is done and they find more, then we can correct that stat. But currently it's about 3% of that time. So the majority of survivors of trafficking knew their trafficker, and whether it was like they knew them for a short amount of time, you know, but somehow they formed some type of relationship with him or her, whether it was for a job, whether they were working in you know, a business establishment, whether they thought they were going to be a singer or a model, or whether it was a boyfriend or a friend or another person recruited them, but they knew that person. And we want to include also familial trafficking, which happens, you know, roughly about 30% of the time with sex trafficking.
The 30% of traffickers, approximately 30% of traffickers, or victims of trafficking victims, were brought into that by a family member.
Trafficked by a family member, and that usually happens quite early, like significantly early on in life.
The age of the victim.
The age of the victim, okay. Correct. Because they're the ones family members are the ones who have access to that child. And that, I mean, and you say, well, I don't see kids standing on a street corner, right? Or, you know, whatever. And especially now with the age of technology and apps and all of that. I mean, people are and we have lots of great law enforcement. We have the National Center of Missing Exploited Kids that are always looking for kids being exploited and working on that. And they're really, really great. But there is that often does not get talked about and needs to be talked about. So we do have that. So most victims / survivors, either depending on what type of spectrum you're looking at, knew their perpetrator. And so whether that was grandpa or dad or an uncle or a cousin or a boyfriend or a girlfriend you met at a party or somebody you thought was going to break you into your singing or modeling career or somebody you were like going to work at a nail salon or something like that, or give you a job or the nanny job. So you knew that person and for a period of time, they gained your trust. They what we call grooming, right? And so that grooming period, and it didn't seem so bad at first, but then it got really bad and you couldn't find your way out because they did something to coerce you, to manipulate you. You know, some people have their kids used against them, you know, if they have kids, but if we're talking about minors, you know, we have to remember that if we think about the age development of, say, either if we're talking about really young kids, we're talking about like the age about the mental development of, say, a 4th grader or say a 10-year-old, or even the age about the mental development capacity of a 15-year-old. You know, it's easy to trick kids.
Yes, it is
easy to trick kids. And not that I want to trick kids, but when we think of the way that traffickers can do that, it's very easy. And even we have a lot of online solicitation going on right now, and through gaming, through apps, through we're online right now. Like you know, like everyone's online. School is online right now. And it's very easy for a trafficker to gain trust of a child and get that kid to send them a picture and then another picture. And then once they have a picture of a kid who isn't, you know, clothed or, you know, something like that they tried to befriend them, then they can use that picture against them. You know, to send it to all their friends and all of the family and
their parents. And it's interesting what you were saying about familial trafficking. because in doing my research on trafficking, I came across an article. In fact, there was two articles I came across, and they were both trafficked by their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them went into detail, and I couldn't believe that this was being told by, this is what, because her, in one instance, her father started to traffic her and then would give her to his friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then would exchange her with his friends for their daughters. And then she went on to that her father would take her to, for example, a fairground, and then she would go into somewhere or the bathrooms with the father and then leave the bathrooms with another man, because then that's where the exchange would happen. And then as she was going on, in my mind, I'm thinking this is an older child. And the more she was going on, and to me, what struck me was when she said, by the time I was 9, I'm thinking, hold on, wait, what? All of this with your father giving you to his friends and then exchanging you for their daughters and taking you to the fairgrounds and taking you to malls and things like that. This was all before she was 9 years old. Mm-hmm. The other one I read, her mother, and she started to speak out when she went to school. The parents would then get in touch with, and the school would get in touch with the parents. She would get the beating, the most horrendous beating, because she had spoken. And then she would say that her parents knew the right things to say to the teachers. I mean, we are going back like 30 plus years, because these are now all grown women. Mm-hmm. But to your point about the familial trafficking and family members, from some of the things that I have read in doing my research, this is actually mothers and fathers mm-hmm. doing this to their children. So that, so do you think that's like almost like another level of awareness that now educators and teachers should have, and it shouldn't be enough for the parents to be able to then just talk their way out of it? And it shouldn't more kind of been done that could have probably helped save these two little girls?
Yeah, I mean, if we look back, to when these kids, I don't know how old these two girls were, but I mean, right now, kind of something that I'm invested in is prevention in schools, and not, so oftentimes when we talk about prevention in schools, parents get worked up because mm-hmm. they think we're going to talk about sex to their kids. And, if you look at studies, you can see that like the average age of entry and things like that. And so we focus on high school, right? And so really that's quite too late. For even if you're looking at the average age of entry being between, depending on the study you're looking at, but that's really too late.
Your point, high school is too late, because on one of these
he
said by the time I was 9.
Right. And for a lot of people who are familial trafficked, like one of the groups that I'm in, like that, it's all the trafficking happened pre 12 years old. So a lot of people started at 4, started at 5, started at 6, 7, 8, right? So, I mean, and a lot of the really intense trafficking happened at 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. So what I would say to that is like, and to your point, school is the one safe place. So mm-hmm. school is the place that, I mean, obviously during the time of COVID, it's not like that. And I am concerned with kids, but normally in normal times, when kids are going to school, it was a safe place, because school was the one place that kids were not having that exploitation happen.
Right.
And the teacher could be the safe person, and, all of those things. And so I do believe that we need to, for one, train teachers to recognize the indicators of trafficking, and specifically the indicators of trafficking from a very young age.
Right.
And we do have to have some prevention education, and it doesn't mean we're talking about sex That means we're talking about coercion, manipulation, signs of abuse, sexual abuse, all those things, to starting really young, starting at preschool, really, to say, you know, and I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but if your home is not a safe place, and your father, your mother, your whoever is taking you out of the home and bringing you to various places to traffic you, to selling you off to groups of men, then someone has to be that person that you can talk to. And you know, I mean, it's not a place where we're going to actually be talking about sex acts. It's talking about, like, we don't keep secrets, like talking about, like, we can talk, you know, things like consent, things like, you know, these kind of things, that these are things that are safety. These are, you know, kind of things, age appropriateness, right? And so you wouldn't talk about, like, an actual like sex act until much later. But things like, if you're not feeling loved, you know, and where do you get that from? Like, on proper online behavior. And, you know, if someone asks you to send them a picture and you don't know that person, what do you do? Kind of thing.
Even if you do know that person, though, even if you do, because
I think that parents need to be monitoring. I mean, if you have safe parents, they should be monitoring their kids, like kids who are doing school right now. Say a first grader who's doing school, it should be in a room with everyone, or in an open space. Kids shouldn't be doing it necessarily in their bedroom, or have their device in their bedroom, or the parent should be able to, like, see what they're doing online, or that kind of thing, right? It shouldn't be things where they're having private conversation. I mean, there's a level, right? You know, kids at a certain age, and teenagers, they want to have their friends and have be able to chat with their friends and all that. And having a good relationship with your kids, being able to be that safe person that they can turn to. And even if you have tension with your teenagers, which you probably will, because that's how teenagers are, but being that person that they can turn to, even if they have things that, you know, you don't agree with, or things like that, or they feel like they're going to get in trouble, just being that safe person, because you're not that safe person, they're going to find somebody else.
And you know, sometimes that safe, quote unquote, safe person really isn't. It's just a front they're putting on to get the child or that person comfortable with them, because that's what grooming is.
Right. And you know, there's data out there that indicates that if a child has, you know, just a few loving person, even one loving person in their life, that will be a prevention before them getting trafficked. So that leads to like the history of foster care kids who are in foster care. They're in foster care because they had an abusive home. And we have a history within sex trafficking of, you know, 80 to 90% of people who have been trafficked have a history of sexual abuse. And so it gets normalized, the abuse, the sex acts, the like, well, you know, your grandpa did this to you, your uncle did this to you, your father did this to you, what's the big deal? You know, and obviously it's a big deal. I'm not minimizing it, but in the movement, it's, you know, the foster parent got paid to take care of you. The pimp says, I'm getting paid to take care of you. We have to move very quickly, you know, all that. And I'm not bashing the foster care system, but you can see the links there. And we do have a high prevalence of foster care kids who were in a bad foster care home. They might be in an abusive foster care home, so they run, and then the trafficker finds them, right? Or they're in the LGBT community. Their parents kick them out because they come out, and then they run away, and then the trafficker finds them, or they find a place to stay, and then that place ends up being exploitive. So we just, you know, have all these risk factors within the US, and we just, need our youth to be safe. We need, and then, even as an adult, people are longing for, we have just so many risk factors, cycles of socioeconomic factors, like poverty, race, all of these issues that make the perfect storm to oftentimes people make a choice that really isn't a choice between paying their rent or feeding their kids or working, forming a relationship that ends up not being good, that ends up being a trafficking relationship that they would have never chosen. But we often call it a choice that's not a choice, right? When you have no other option, maybe you dropped out of school early because you were being abused and you were in the foster care system or, whatever else, and now you can't get a job. And then COVID hit, and, and all of these things, our numbers for calls, our numbers for cases in the emergency department, honestly, in a half of a year, they are equal to all of the calls last year. So you can see that they are, in the last few weeks, it was nonstop calls, nonstop emergency calls. So they've just gone up so much. And those are only the people that are coming in and being identified, not all of the people, so it's just astronomical, the number of people. All of the hotlines everywhere are just, their numbers are just going berserk. And these are only people who are actually calling hotlines, not that are actually out there. There's plenty of people that are out there that
never call a hotline,
that don't even know the hotlines exist.
And it's interesting that you should say that, because one of the things I was going to do at the end is actually give the hotline number. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, so that people can know there's a hotline. Because to be honest with you, until what really prompted me to really look into the area of trafficking is a conversation that I had with a young lady about her experiences within the family. And that made me stop and think, well, hold on a second, that doesn't sound right. So I started to look into it. And that's when I started to come up with all the information about trafficking. And I say that to say, this is somebody that was quite close to me at one point in time. And I can't say that I ever noticed or any signs until they started to speak. And so and I think that could be the case with a lot of people. They're just completely oblivious to what is going on. And I think, again, for a lot of people, unless something impacts your actual reality, a lot of people remain oblivious to a lot of things, because how would they know? Why would they know? And I had no idea that there were hotline numbers, there were resources, there was help out there. And again, to be honest, until Taken, I didn't even know trafficking was even something that existed. We do, and especially not here in the US, because unfortunately and sadly to say, we do hear about in other more less developed countries where children are sold because the family is poor, they need they need the money. So we do hear about that, but after that we just think, oh, that's so sad, and then that's where it ends, and then we just continue, just as you were type thing. So you talking about this has really informed me, and I'm really hoping that it starts to inform listeners, and there's more awareness about things that you can look out for and what you can do to actually help. Because it's one thing to look out, one thing to see signs, but it's another thing to say, because what a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to get involved because supposing I'm wrong. And I think I would rather make a call and be wrong than not make a call and be right.
Yeah. And I think, there, especially in the United States, there's a lot of national there's a lot of really great nonprofits out there. There's a lot of nonprofits out there, but there's some that are very vetted and good. And so on a national spectrum, you have the Polaris Project, which is a national hotline, and we'll provide that information. It has national data, and within your local community, I would say to get to know where, depending on where you are, then the really vetted national, or that your vetted agency. Within that, and you can find that by even going to Polaris. I have a list of them, you know, within your local area, because I know there are people will be listening from all over. But even within that, you know, we have Truckers Against Trafficking, which really engage the trucker community, because there's trafficking that goes on at truck stops. And even without that, like, truckers drive all over the country. And so we have specifically with sex trafficking, this is a man-dominated demand field. And so we have that, and really they have really gotten engaged, and it's a way to empower people. And so on that, we have also another national, which has really become because if we don't disrupt the demand for sex, and like make it be unacceptable to buy sex, then it will never end, right? And so there's an organization called EPIC, which is a men-led kind of disruption agency, and they're partnering with something called the Fast Ride, and they have also engaged the motorcycle community. And the motorcycle community is really great, but it's another, mostly, I mean, there are women motorcyclists, but they mostly are male dominated. And it's really great to get good men involved and have them disrupt the demand. And there's other agencies as well, but there's great agencies in every community. And, you know, and depending on where you are, that is kind of the community or the agency you want to check out. And because if I just start naming off a couple of them, it won't be super helpful if I name agencies in Los Angeles, it won't be super helpful if you're in Maine. But there's great agencies in Maine as well. So you have to kind of look at those national lists and find out. But if you are in crisis, you can call the National Human Trafficking Agency, and they will connect you to an agency within your local community. And if you do know somebody,
I've got that number here to read out at the end, the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Yeah. So, I mean, and you can also, if it's a crisis situation, you can also reach out to your local law enforcement, but they will definitely, then Polaris is definitely the place you want to start. And they're connected to many, many agencies throughout the country that have been vetted by them. So that is definitely where you want to start.
That's great. Yeah. And as I mentioned, I've got numbers for here in the US and the UK that I'm going to read out at the end. So thank you. But Christine, if you don't mind, and I know you and I have spoken about this, your own story, your own journey that has led you to today to be in such a strong voice and a strong advocate. What is your story behind how you actually got to be this voice?
Just briefly, I was trafficked by a family member from a very early age. So and the first time I was trafficked, I was about 4. And throughout my life, that person was very, trafficked me, and no one in my community kind of had any indication. I went to school, and he was quite violent, and but people just didn't know. And throughout my life, I was being sold to men in various venues, like you were saying, at the mall, in festivals, and private venues, and private men's clubs, that kind of thing, and motels, and all of these things, and it just always looked like I was with this person. Like it never looked like any, it just looked like a little girl with him. And even in school, I was identified as being learning disabled, which I didn't learn till I was in grad school that I was not. But it was just all the trauma I had, that when I would come to school the next day, I was processing all of the trauma I had, and I just couldn't think, or I was tired and from working all night, and I just couldn't. So anyway, so I've experienced I experienced pornography and commercial sexual exploitation and an extreme amount of violence and being exploited by a few family members, and just no one ever identified that. People just thought I was quiet and shy and withdrawn, and I didn't have any friends. But I didn't have friends because I wasn't allowed to have friends. So, yeah.
So it was really, you were a traumatized child that was withdrawn, partly because you weren't allowed to have friends, but partly because, like you were saying, you were processing what was going on with you. Because I'm sure you knew that, okay, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Well, the person who was trafficking me, was extremely violent and would threaten to kill me. So if I were to talk, he would have killed me.
Right.
So it wasn't that I was withdrawn. It was that people weren't necessarily taking care of me. It was that if the teacher's going around asking how a Christmas break was, what do you say when you spent your Christmas break being exploited?
Right.
And the other kids are talking about going on trips. You just there's not much to say, so instead it presents as being quiet and withdrawn when really I can't say this.
Right. So
because if I say this, I'm going to get killed. Right. So, in my, and there were people that were involved, in a lot of places throughout the community. So it was a dangerous situation to be in, but there's a lot of kids who kind of live that way. And now we're getting better at recognizing this kid never talks, and she sleeps a lot. And every time she has to go home, she kind of freaks out or gets really angry or completely shuts down or refuses to leave or whatever. And so those are indicators to teachers that something weird is going on here. But at the time, we just weren't talking about those things. So, and still, to be honest, I was a teacher, and teachers still didn't really talk about those things and were not good at identifying sexual abuse unless a kid was really acting out sexually. So, if a kid comes in with a black eye, you report that. But how do you report a kid who is being sexually abused, but sexually exploited? And how do you see signs of that in a little girl?
Outward signs, telltale signs for them to look at, say, okay, black eye, or her arm is a bit funny. Is it what happened to her arm? There's nothing physical that they can actually look at to see.
When someone's very good at doing being that trafficker, they kind of know to not leave marks in visible places. Okay. So there were no marks on my face. There were no marks on my arms or whatever. And the places that were marks, it was not in a visible location that a teacher would see. So all of it was kind of outward demeanor or being really tired or a mark of a learning disability or like a learning issue is that your IQ is very high, but your ability is very low. And so they would tell me, you're just not trying, but it's, or I would come in and there would be like a test on a book we were supposed to read. And I hadn't read the book because you were supposed to read it at home on Christmas break or something. And I did not have time for that. And so I guess, and it was clear that I hadn't read the book. And so either that, or I just didn't understand anything I read. And so that just ended up to where I needed all these school interventions because I didn't understand anything I read. And it wasn't, I didn't understand anything I read. It was that all of this other stuff was going on, but I couldn't say any of that.
Right.
So,
yeah. So what was your out? How did you get away from being exploited?
For me, like no one ever really helped me. It's probably my least favorite question.
You don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
Eventually I just came to California because basically this person would not stop coming after me, even when I went to college, even when I went to law enforcement and asked for a restraining order, but they said, we can't do that unless he tries to kill you again. So eventually I just packed up all of my things. I had a friend who drove out to California with me, and she really didn't know at the time. Well, she might have known. I don't know what was going on. And I just basically had to start my life over and be across the country. So there was no like rescue effort. And to be honest, in most survivors, I'll say, there's no rescue. There's no breaking down a door, pulling someone out. It's that survivor choosing to leave the situation. It's choosing to get away. It's finding a way out. It's finding that. And sometimes there is a law enforcement effort. And sometimes there is that, but in a lot of cases, it is that survivor saying, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And them choosing to get away. And for me, I had to go across the country and start over.
And Christine, I'm so very grateful that you did that, because the work that you're doing, not just for the work that you're doing, but for your own self, where now you can be that voice, that survivor advocate, helping so many. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your work and to even share the personal details of what happened to you. So I really do appreciate that. So Christine, I do have the numbers that I'm going to read out shortly, but any last parting advice that you would want to give to if a person being exploited is listening, or to someone that suspects that they have seen somebody being trafficked? Is there anything finally in closing that you would like to add?
Well, I would encourage each person that's listening from a vetted organization, to attend or listen to a basic human trafficking presentation. There's a lot of really great presentations that are happening right now. They're accessible to all because they're online, that you don't have to travel and attend them. So I would encourage each person to do that, especially if you have kids, and especially if you're some kind of frontline person, if you work in a hospital, if you're a teacher, if you're a social worker, if you're anything like that, and just to know the facts yourself so you're not caught up in something that either is in a movie or that you've just heard someone else talk about. There's a lot of really good resources through the National Missing Exploited Kids, through Polaris Project, through fact sheets that I can even share with you so that you can provide them. Things like that. As far as if you're a survivor, if you're going through this right now and you want assistance, then I would state to you that, you can get help if you want it.
Okay.
You can call the national hotline, text. There's a texting option. You can text that, and if you don't get the help that you want or need, reach out, and we can, assist you. And there's a lot of organizations in every community that can assist you. Reach out to your local organization when you can, and they will help you. To a local citizen who thinks they are witnessing trafficking, they can first take a deep breath, and you're not the police. Please don't rush in to a situation, especially if you think the trafficker is there with the victim.
Right.
It is not your job to rescue anyone, and we don't rescue people. So call the national hotline, call your local law enforcement, take note of what's going on, but please don't rush in, because this is a criminal industry and you do not need to get involved. So please just call the national hotline, call your local law enforcement, report what you've seen, and learn the facts, learn the evidence before making grandiose claims. But definitely, if you do see an emergency situation in place, do call 911 and or your non-emergency number, whichever is more appropriate at that time. And we want to keep you and your community members safe. And that will be the most appropriate thing. But please do keep the national hotline in your phone, and I'll send some fact sheets to you that you can share.
Yeah, definitely, because I'll have those up on my website. So
thank
you so much. Christine, thank you so much for sharing and for educating us. It's something that I do believe we really do need to be aware of and know, and just be vigilant. And I appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I'll be in touch definitely to get those the information from you, so that I can definitely put it up.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
So
Thank you. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here, to talk about Christine's experience with being a child victim of trafficking, and also the work that she's doing as an advocate and a survivor. If you are a person being trafficked, if you suspect that there's any trafficking going on, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The number in the US is 1-888-373-7888. That number once more, in the US, it's 1-888-373-7888. In the UK, you can call the Salvation Army's 24-hour confidential helpline for reporting modern-day slavery. That number is 800-818-3733. That is the Salvation Army's 24-hour modern-day slavery line. To report modern-day slavery, it's 0800-818-3733. There are also numbers for modern day slavery foundations in the UK. That's a 24-hour number also. That is 0800 0121 700. That number again is 0800 0121 700. And then there's also the National Society of Prevention to Cruelty to Children in the UK, the NSPCC, 0808 800 5000. If you think a child is in danger of abuse or of trafficking, please call the NSPCC to help that child. Again, my name is Alison J. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening in to Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. Please remember to subscribe, hit the like button and share.